We're going to go ahead and get started. I think I know most of you. My name is Cheryl McWilliams. I'm a wellness specialist here at Midcoast Parkview Health. And this is our last session of Preserving Health for this season. We take a break in the summer. In fact, I was telling some of you a little bit ago, I don't normally do programming in June because, you know, the 2 days of summer we get in Maine, we want to spend it outdoors, right? And as I was driving in, it was so beautiful. I'm like, is anybody going to show up? I don't know if I would if I were them. So I'm glad that you're here. We are few, but we are mighty. And I am going to keep it short tonight because I do want you to get home and enjoy the sun. A few final things. We've covered, you know, a fair bit of ground in our time together, talking about how to get started in gardening and how to break your land and get your seedlings started and all that good stuff. Tonight we're going to be talking about how to grow your soil, which I know that sounds kind of weird, but good plants grow in good soil. Healthy plants grow in good soil. Nutrient-dense plants grow in good soil. We want to eat those things which are packed as full as much as possible with good, healthy nutrients, right? And if you're going to spend the time and energy into planting and growing a garden, you want to get as much bang for your buck as possible. And your buck is not just literally your money, but your time, because gardening does take time. It's very good for you. The data out there is amazing in terms of the physical activity. There is a Mainer years and years and years ago who said that one of the best physical activities was useful labor. Useful labor. That was back in the 1800s, and I believe it to be true. All right, so how are we going to produce healthy, nutrient-dense plants? There's several ways. One is we're going to add organic matter into our ground. We've talked about compost. Not only does it fertilize, but it also has beneficial microbes. Remember we talked about how the roots of our plants have hairs on them, and those little hairs send out communications to the microbes around and in them, and that those microbes are communicating not only with the microbes right next to them, but with the microbes, you know, for some distance around them, okay? Want lots of microbes because that helps our plants to be healthy and strong. Mulch. I want to avoid plastic or landscape fabric, which can hinder interactions between mulch and soil. A lot of places, especially the larger growing, you know, farms, you'll see this plastic stuff or this black fabric stuff. I'm not a fan for lots of reasons. There are organic farms all over creation that farm wildly successfully without using plastic. Okay, and the reason I don't want plastic is we've read about plastic and some of the challenges, right? Particularly those nanoparticles get down into our soil, and once it's there, it's really difficult to get that out, and I don't want it in my land. If I'm growing organically, why then would I want to cover my ground with something that's not organic? Right?
So even the landscape fabric has plastic in it?
So the landscape fabric, there are different ones. They are not all created equal. There are a few out there that are decent. They're very expensive. They're so expensive. I was at a gardening conference January a year and a half ago now, and there was a company there, and they made theirs out of plant-based fibers, and they lasted about 5 years. You know, you could use them, but I don't remember the dollar amount. It was wild. It blew my brain kind of wild, and I thought, well, I don't need that, you know. It was super expensive. It adds organic matter as it decomposes, because when you think of mulch, you're thinking about what? What are some examples of mulch? Leaves, chopped up leaves and grass and that kind of stuff, pine needles. And as that stuff decomposes, it's adding nutrients to your soil.
Won't grass add weeds though?
What's that?
If you cut grass on your beds, won't that create weeds that you'd be weeding them off though?
So if your lawn has a lot of weeds in it, then you might not want to add that grass to it. I do, because, which leads me to, mulch suppresses weeds. How is that? weeds grow in the presence of sun, right? And if the sun's not getting on that dirt, fewer weeds actually grow. But that is the reason why I tend to use straw instead of hay, because hay can have weeds in it. Do I never use hay? No, I use hay. We had a horse for a long time. When we rehomed the horse, we had some extra hay. I use the hay in the garden, not the end of the world. But adding that mulch definitely will help to suppress weeds. It also helps to maintain moisture. We've talked about that. We want to water well and wisely, but not more often than necessary, right? And remember, you're watering from the bottom, not from the top. I didn't know that for the longest time. I would take my hose out there. I had one of these fancy little wand things and thought I was doing something really great, to find out that I really wasn't. Cover crops. This is something I also didn't know, in terms of, we would harvest and just leave our ground bare all winter, not realizing that I was harming the soil in doing that, okay? So the reason we want cover crops is to protect the soil over the winter. Our talk in November is how to put our garden to bed for the winter. So we're going to talk about what we do to help to preserve all the work we put into this black soil over the summer, right? It prevents erosion. As it decomposes, it also adds organic material. So when we plant cover crops, and there's lots of different ones, we'll just turn it over. And we let that crop literally rot there in that bed or in that field, whatever it is that we're planting in, right? I'm not harvesting that cover crop, even if it is harvestable. I literally just turn it over and let that material rot in the field. And then plant residue helps to feed the soil organisms. What do I mean by plant residue? Some weeds I will pull and let them rot right there as long as that weed has not gone to seed. And there are some weeds that are actually really helpful, like fetch. Fetch is that kind of viney looking thing. It's got sort of a purple flower on it, and my brain just went blank as to what it adds to your soil, but it adds some good things. If I pull it, and sometimes I do, a lot of times I just let it grow, but if I pull it, I let it sit there and decompose because it's adding that nutrient. So any of your green matter, green material, you can let decompose right in there as long as it's not gone to seed. You don't want to let your weeds go to seed. I think I told you the story a few years ago. I don't even remember what the situation was. Our family has been crazy for a little while. We have a lot of caregiving going on, and we got home, I think from helping my dad, I don't remember, and our garden was so wild, you could not see the cucumbers. Like, I'm literally on my hands and knees, like wading through, pulling the weeds. I had to find the cucumbers. We had a trellis for them to go on, but we'd been gone for a while, and they had just spilled over, and like there were so many. I harvested vast amounts of weeds that year, and I, not knowing that you can actually use some of those things, threw them away because I don't want weeds in my garden, and I could have actually used some of them, but I didn't know that back then. Improving soil structure. So we talked last time a little bit about aeration and how good it is to aerate our soil, but we don't want to go hog wild and overdo that. But aeration does help to improve the soil structure. It helps to ensure good drainage. Case in point, I went out 2 days ago. My husband was out in the garden, and he had been out for quite some time, so I go out with my little quart of ice water, and here, honey, has some water. Squish, squish, squish. It was so wet. It was so wet. The garden itself wasn't, except for one spot. It was like a tiny little swimming pool there. I had no idea because it had been some days since I'd been out, and I knew that we were having some drainage areas in that part of our garden is 5,000 square feet. And I knew that there were some drainage issues out there in that particular corner, but I didn't realize how big they were, how big they've gotten, because we just haven't had time to like really deal with it, frankly. So I have to deal with that this summer, because as we are growing more, we're using, we put that square footage in to grow into, not that we were necessarily all there. Well, now we're kind of there, and we never really got to that corner of the garden, and now I got to get to it. So ensuring your drainage is good. Loosening, the compaction allows for better root growth and microbial activity. You want to avoid tilling after initial ground breaking. Now, there are different views on this. There are some people that will till every single year. They will till every single year. Or they'll use their big tractors to till every single year. I'm not a fan, because as we till, we are disturbing the microbiome in the soil. We are chopping the earthworms in half. We want those earthworms and those insects and all of that. So I think I told you before, my husband, when we first put in our garden, the poor man was out there just shaking with the tiller, trying to get this hard ground, broken up. It was rough. It was very rough. We had to till. Like, I would have been there today still trying to, if I was breaking it up by hand. But once we tilled and we put in our beds, we haven't tilled since. We will break up the ground every year, but I use like a hand rake to do that. We're not going in with the tiller, because it damages the soil structure and it kills beneficial microbes. Yes, ma'am?
By raking it, is that going down deep enough? Because with our snow and our rain, doesn't the dirt get compacted?
Yeah, so it's not like a leaf rake. It's more like a pitchfork. And you stick it in, and you kind of stick it in and pull back. Yeah, and when I first started gardening, I used a pitchfork, because that's all I had. And now I have a sturdier, rake for that purpose. Dr. Howe, who was planning to be here tonight and could not, and he sends his apologies, because one of the things I wanted him to show you was his rake. He has actually a really cool one, and it was not that expensive, where it's a little bit flatter and wider, so it's almost not quite the width of the bed, but almost. And you stick it down and you pull back and you just keep going. A few minutes, you got it all done, versus me with my little pitchfork thing. I'm, useful labor. Useful labor. You want to minimize the soil disturbance and include plant diversity. We've talked about plant diversity before, in terms of rotating our crops, but also in terms of like companion planting and using different varieties. So this year we have 8 different varieties of tomatoes planted. I have planted more than that in the past. But we've got, different things going. It's not all the same. And this year we're growing our tomatoes in a completely different part of the garden than we've ever grown them in before. And we're growing beans where we had our tomatoes before, and we're growing corn somewhere different. It's every year it's somewhere different. So that's helpful. Soil microbes, we've talked about the compost. It's a source of microbes that break down organic matter. In the compost itself, there are microbes, right? So we think about compost as it relates to fertilizer, but there's microbes in the actual compost. And we want them because they're good. Crop rotation helps to prevent the nutrient depletion, helps to prevent pests, helps to prevent disease, and promotes healthy soil microbes. Avoid the chemicals. They can harm beneficial soil organisms. So most of the fertilizers that you go out and buy, at the regular stores, they're going to be regular, chemical-based fertilizers. When I'm talking about fertilization, I'm talking about using natural elements. It could be worm castings. Well, my husband came home with a plastic bin of worms and put them in our living room. I thought he had lost his mind. I mean, lost his mind. He went to a program at the Topsom Library years ago, and the guy was there, and he had the holes and the things, and my husband's feeding the worms, and I'm thinking, this guy's gone nuts. And it's awesome. It's amazing what the worm castings. I took Lily, my daughter, a few weeks ago out to Oklahoma. She's looking at a school out there. And one of the neat things that school does, it's a boarding high school, in the afternoon, all the kids go to school in the morning, and in the afternoon, they have useful labor so that by the time the kids graduate from high school, not only do they have their high school diploma, but they also have some sort of useful trade that they can use to help fund their way through college, right? They've got aviation, and they've got, it's a fun place. But one of the things that they have is commercial organic farming. And they get certified to do, all this stuff. And one of the things that they did as they were planting their tomatoes is they would put in, each place where they were planting a little spoonful of worm castings. And they figured that I wouldn't know anything about that. I'm like, oh yeah, my husband is a farmer of worms. And they're like, okay, what? Like, we've heard of farmer of corn and tomatoes. And I'm like, oh no, my husband's got these bins all over the foyer of our house full of worms. And I thought that was great. But they were sharing sort of what it does for their produce. Yes, ma'am. It's okay.
I'm embarrassed. So when you say worm casting,
It's a worm doo-doo.
oh,
Worm
it's the
poo.
worm doo-doo that you use.
Yeah. So the worms are in a container, and you feed them like once a week. Your kitchen scraps, banana peelings, all your kitchen scraps. You don't want to overfeed them because that's not good, but you just lay it on top, and next week when you go and lift the lid, all of that is gone. And what you're left with, this is not worm castings, but it could be. It's like this color.
And then where are the worms? They're just dead?
They're in
They're
there.
happy.
Oh, they're very
How do
happy.
you
I'm sorry, I
how do you
don't know
sort
the
it
difference.
though? Because I've kind of thought about
Yeah,
starting that because I get so many food
I
scraps,
went to
but
that class.
Yeah.
how do you get the soil that you use out without the worm?
Without the
Or like how do you
worms.
separate it if you get that going?
So he does it in two ways. One, he'll get it from the bottom because stuff kind of works its way down towards the bottom, and they're usually coming up towards the top to get what's there. Otherwise, he's just, he's really careful. There are worm casting teas that you can make. There's different ways of harvesting them, but we've used both the tea and the actual casting. I like using the tea because there's something about, what it is. It doesn't bother me, but there are members of my household that kind of have a hard time with the concept of it. But they're fine to walk around the garden with a pitcher of the tea because it has full of nutrients. And
Cheryl, I think we need a field trip to your place.
So you want to think about building a soil food web. We have a food web. What is a soil food web? Well, let's think about our food web. Our food, most of us, we go to the grocery store and we buy food, right? That food was not grown there. That food was grown in California or Mexico or Hawaii or China or wherever, right? A farmer somewhere grew some food. That farmer then had to get his or her crop from their field to some sort of distribution center or some sort of processing center, right? So there were truckers that were involved, or there were people pushing wheelbarrows that were involved, right? And once it got to that processing facility, it was probably washed, it was probably packaged, right? And then it was put on some sort of transport. It could be a ship, it could be a 18-wheeler, it could be a train, it could be a camel. Who knows what it is, but it was transported from that location somewhere else. For us, because we get so much foods from all over the planet, it was transported to a port, right? And then it was shipped from that port by airplane, by ship, or whatever, gets to a distribution center here in America, you know, and then it gets distributed to the various grocery stores. It could be Harris Teeter or Shaw's or Walmart or, you know, whatever. It gets distributed then to their distribution centers, and then it leaves their distribution center and eventually makes it to Brunswick, Maine. And then we eventually go into the grocery store and we buy it and we bring it back to our refrigerators, and then at some point, hopefully, we prepare it. We don't let it sit in the fridge and turn green, right? Some of us do, it'll turn fuzzy, but that's our, that's our food web. We are not growing up and living on farms, and we are not self-contained or self-sustainable anymore. My grandparents, who were very much alive and well during the Great Depression, didn't even know there was a depression because they were dirt poor. They lived on the river. They ate what they grew their whole lives. They didn't even know that anything was any different because life was the same for them. But for us today, life is very different. We're very, very, very disconnected from our food, right? And then there's that stuff that we call food, which actually isn't. So it was grown in the field, and then somehow it got to the processing center, and from the processing center it got to some chemical lab, and you know, it's like Frankenstein stuff. So we're really, that's our web. What I mean by a soil web, excuse me. What I mean by a soil web is soil is a complex living ecosystem, and it supports a wide variety of organisms, including microbes, insects, and worms. Organisms play this crucial role in nutrient cycling from plant health. So all those insects and those microbes and the worms and all of those things, as our plants grow, they are encircling that. And remember I told you, does anybody remember the number that I gave you? Because I'm blanking on it. When the microbes, because there's microbes in the plant, right? There's microbes in the root. There's microbes on the hairs of the root. It's a crazy number, which is right outside of my head right now. It'll come. It was a crazy distance around that, just one plant. Feet, many feet around that one plant. These microbes are communicating, oh, this plant needs more nitrogen, this plant needs more calcium, this plant needs more whatever, and it's sending it. And they can test the microbes to see what they are accumulating feet away from the plant. Those microbes have communicated that, who've communicated that, who've communicated that, right? So that's what I mean by our food web. There's a web, our soil web, there's a web of communication within the natural world around those plants, right? And if we go and disrupt that soil, we've now disrupted that communication. Does that make sense? Okay. And then water. We want our water deeply from the bottom with mulch and eventually plant foliage covering the soil. So what I mean by plant foliage, as our plants, think of like a squash plant that's got these big, these big leaves. They cover the dirt. What I told Lily just yesterday, she was out in the garden, much to her dissatisfaction. Just saying. I'm like, honey, I don't want to see the dirt. Like, we need no dirt. I don't want to see any dirt. So right now it's the mulch, but as the summer wears on and those plants get bigger, those leaves from that plant are going to start to cover that area as well. Why? Why is that important to either have mulch or foliar coverage? Because it reduces the amount of weeds that will grow, right? Because it's not getting that direct sunlight, all right? It's going to help with water retention. We're not going to have to water as often. We want to water deeply, not often. And that's something I did not know for the longest time. I thought I'd give it a little drink every day. I take a drink every day, so I figured my plants needed drinks every day too. And I wondered why my tomatoes didn't taste like my daddy's tomatoes. His are really good, and mine didn't have a lot of flavor. I was watering the flavor right out of them, right? So we want to water well and water deeply, not as often. So there are nutrients. There's lots of nutrients. I just put a few up here, but there are some that are more common than others. When we go to buy like fertilizer and whatnot, you'll often see the NPK number. It'll have N with a number and then P with a number and a K with a number. Well, it's talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's what it's talking about. Why nitrogen? It's a key element in our plant growth. It actually helps our plants to grow. It's found in plant cells and in plant proteins. It's easily leached out of the soil by heavy rains. And every weekend in this state, for I don't know how many weekends, it's getting crazy. Like, it's crazy. It's been 15 weeks. Is it 15 weeks? Like, it's been crazy.
Is that what it is, really?
Since March.
Yeah.
No wonder why we're all depressed.
I know, right?
Since March.
15 Saturdays.
Yeah,
this
it's-
Saturday's
it's
supposed to rain
crazy.
again.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
This will be 16.
And some of those rains have been, kind of no joke. It's been a bit of a deluge. Well, when we've got these big deluges, some nitrogen, if we're not careful, can get leached right out of our gardens. Composted manure is a rich source of nitrogen, but that word is very important. It has to be composted for lots of different reasons. You don't want to put fresh manure on your garden. It can just burn your plants right up. And the state of Maine is actually doing some really interesting things. The University of Maine, they have a farm up north of me, the name of which is out of my head. It'll come back to me. My oldest daughter worked there. It's a research farm. And they are composting all sorts of interesting things and doing interesting things with them in terms of research. And some of the stuff that's coming out of there, she would occasionally, bring some extra plants home. And I'm thinking, this is the weirdest looking whatever. And it would grow this beautiful watermelon or, whatever, because they're doing some pretty interesting research. But some of the research that they're doing is on composted stuff. And it's not just plant material. They're composting like bones of animals. In fact, she took me to the compost pile. And it was gross. It was like a death parlor for animals. It was kind of sad, but they're composting that. Phosphorus is another one. It helps transfer energy from sunlight to the plants, and it stimulates early root and plant growth. Why is that important?
This makes a stronger plant.
That's right. It makes for a stronger plant. You want those good roots. Remember we talked about when we were doing soil blocking, we talked about, the difference between like an air pruning and a root bound kind of situation. And we want those, when we plant those plants, for those roots to be really solid and to be able to entrench really well. Phosphorus can help to do that. Composted manure from grain-fed animals is a particularly rich source. Grain-fed animals, all right? We used, we're an equestrian family. We used our horse manure, but we would age that for, some years before we used that. And what I mean by age it, the girls would go and muck out the stall and they'd dump it in a place, but each year it was a different place. So this year it's here, and next year it's there, and the next year it's over yonder, so that I can know how many years old this pile is, and I would go and turn that stuff so that it's decomposing nicely. I know someone who a few years ago was super excited about starting a garden, and they had horses. Well, actually, they didn't have horses, but they lived right next to and worked on a horse at a horse facility, so they had lots of access to horse manure. And they went And instead of like doing what we've talked about here in this class in terms of preparing your beds and your soil or whatever, they went and laid out yards and yards and yards of horse manure and planted their garden directly in the horse manure. I don't know what they were thinking, but it was a good science experiment. It didn't go well, but it was a good science experiment. Okay, potassium. It increases the vigor and disease resistance. It can improve fruit quality. You want to be careful. You don't want to overdo it on any of this stuff. And it helps to form and move starches, sugars, and oils. Why would you want to move starches, sugars, and oils within a plant? Who cares? Why would you want to do that?
I don't know.
Okay, because you're feeding that plant. By moving the starches and the sugars and the oils, more of the nutrients are able to get to the full part of the plant, right? Calcium, essential for root health, growth of new roots and hairs. Those hairs, and I remember when I first learned that plants had hairs, I thought of my grandma's chin. I don't know why, but I did. You know, she was the cutest little thing, and she would shave her chin. You know, every morning she'd shave her chin, and I would wonder, why does Grandma have hair on her chin? I didn't understand it. But then I realized, you know, sometimes as we age, things aren't quite how they used to be, right? Well, for plants, we want the hairs. We want them to grow those hairs because that's how it's absorbing the nutrients from the ground, and they're very, very helpful. Lime, gypsum, and dolomite can be sources of oh no, we're not to calcium. Now we're to calcium. Essential for root health, growth of new roots and hairs, and lime can be a source. Magnesium, sulfur, there's all sorts of elements that, you know, in terms of amendments that we can talk about as it relates to gardening. But the real kicker, the real important thing is that you get that soil test done so you'll know what you need. And when I get my soil test done and I need something, I don't run to the store and buy calcium or buy nitrogen or buy phosphorus. I'm looking at what can I plant in my garden that will put nitrogen into the soil. What can I mulch in my garden that will put these things into my soil? I'm not going and getting chemicals and putting on my soil. I'm growing my soil. Just as my children did not go from birth to college in one day or one growing season, I don't want my garden to do that either, right? I want my garden to grow naturally over time, because if I'm growing it naturally over time, just like you put good food into your kids, you put an education into your kids, you're doing these nurturing things to your kids, it's to grow them so that they will be ready to be a great citizen of our country, right? That they'll be able to be independent and successful and happy and all those things. Well, it's the same with our gardens. We're spending time nurturing and growing our garden and nurturing and growing that soil so that the plants that come out of that are full of richness for us to then completely devour them. Okay. You do want to balance calcium and phosphorus. They are essential for plant growth. Again, get a soil test. If your soil is deficient in these nutrients, plants may struggle to absorb other nutrients. All right, so it's just like us. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, right? But if we get a sickness and we spend time, nauseous and throwing up. My sister used to say, praying to the porcelain goddess. If you're losing the contents of your belly enough, your electrolytes are going to get out of whack, right? And if your that's why we gave our kids Pedialyte if we had to when they were kids, or when my husband and I lived overseas and you don't have access to that stuff, you make something similar to it, to rehydrate them. Well, it's the same for us. We want to make sure that we are giving our soil what it needs so that the plants can absorb what it needs. If our electrolytes get out of whack, we're out of whack, right? If we get too much iron or too little iron, we're out of whack. If we get too much calcium or too little calcium, oh, I'm sorry, I'm banging my thing here. We can get out of whack. Well, it's the same with our gardens, all right? So we want to, I try to think of my garden as a baby. I want to feed it what it needs in the different stages that it is. Organic versus non-organic fertilizers. Okay, so there's the organic camp and there's the non-organic camp, and the two shall not, communicate. I'm not of that genre. I do tend to be more organic for the reasons that we've talked about in this class already, all right? There's some very specific reasons. But does that mean that I would never use something non-organic? No, it doesn't. I'm less likely to, but a lady, a very nice lady, shared with us, and I wish that it had been available for you. At our last class, we had a volunteer donate a box of different kinds of potatoes and some onion sprouts and whatnot. It was such a generous gift, and the purpose was for me to be able to share it with you. And when I got here, that box was nowhere to be found. I could not find it anywhere. We found it days later. Fortunately, it was time enough to be able to share it with people, so that those things could grow. And I'm sorry it didn't make it to you, but not everything in that box was organic. Does that mean I wouldn't plant it in my garden? No, it doesn't, but I'm going to grow it organically. It may not have been organic as a seed potato or as an onion or a shallot or whatever it was, but I'm going to grow it organically. Okay, so organic, it's made from once living plant material and or animal waste, versus non-organic, which is made from manufactured chemicals, often from mineral deposits or nitrogen in the atmosphere. Organic requires soil microorganisms to break down organic matter and release nutrients, so it's a slow release. Just like we didn't force our kids, force them, to grow really fast. We didn't do that, right? We gave them what they needed to grow healthfully. That's what we want to do for our gardens. Versus the non-organic provides a quick release, making nutrients readily available to the plants right now. Versus the slow nurturing and building. Improves soil structure, water holding capacity, and microbial activity. Versus the other often reduces microbial activity, leads to nutrient imbalances over time, and can cause pH imbalances, all right? The organic is less likely to pollute water sources compared to synthetic fertilizers due to slower release and lower solubility. When you're doing it organically and you're mulching and you're doing all of those things, if you get a deluge, you're less likely to get massive amounts of erosion running down into the creek, right? And the creek leads to the river, which leads to the whatever. I'm from the South, as some of you know, and they've got huge farms down there, especially like animal-based farms. In fact, a few weeks ago when we were out in the Midwest, we drove past some ginormous like cow operations. I mean, thousands of head of cattle in these small little areas, and these huge mounds of their waste and pools of garbage, right? Well, you get a big deluge. One of them was right next to a river, You get a big deluge. Where's all that stuff going, right? So I want to be mindful of that. Examples are compost, manure, seaweed extract. My friend Ed Webster used to go to the ocean and gather seaweed and bring it back and put it on his garden. He was very careful to make sure it wasn't, he'd wash it so it wasn't too salty to burn up the plants. Versus the non-organic can lead to what's called dead dirt. Have you heard of that? Dead dirt. It's dirt, There's nothing growing in it. There's nothing living in it. It's just true. It's just dead. There's nothing there. And they keep planting in it, but in order to grow something in it, they got to add all of these fertilizers and insecticides, and I got to genetically modify it so it's not susceptible to this because my dirt is so dead, it can't fight it off. You kind of think of it like as an immune system, right? The immune system of the dirt is just dead. So we don't want that. It also leads to nutrient runoff and water pollution. So now's the fun part, biochar. Have you heard of biochar? Okay, so biochar is kind of fun. You can make your own, but it's dirty work and it can be time consuming. And I toyed with doing it tonight and I ran out of time and I realized it probably wasn't a feasible thing to do anyway, but I'm noodling on trying to figure out a way for us to be able to do this one day because it's super good for your gardens, and it's kind of a fun thing. There's different ways of doing it, but the fun way to do it is to dig a hole in the ground in the shape of a cone, right? And you get wood and you start a little fire down there. And it's small stuff at first, and once the fire's going pretty good, then you layer on bigger pieces and it burns down in bigger pieces and bigger pieces, but you don't want it to burn to ash. You're letting it burn to, looks like dark charcoal kind of. It's clumpy kind of stuff, and you burn it down and burn it down. And there's a science to it in terms of the color smoke. When it's white smoke, it means this, or if it's gray smoke, it means that, or whatever. But essentially, you're starting a fire, and you're creating charcoal. It's charcoal from the wood, but you're not turning it to ash. And what that does, once it's burned, then you fill it with water. You put it out with water because you want to stop the burning process and just let it sit. And then you've got these clumps of black, kind of looks like, it's not hard like charcoal, but it's burnt wood, which is very, very, very porous. And you can put that into your garden. Most people who make their own biochar will mix it like with some molasses. This is gross. I'm not telling you to do it. They will also mix it with urine. You can actually buy urine for this purpose. I wouldn't. You can. Blech. Google it if you want to. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. But they will literally pour in buckets of that stuff. They'll mix it up and they'll put that into their gardens, roughly about 10%. You don't want too much of it because you can overdo it on biochar. But it improves the soil. It increases soil fertility and nutrient retention. It improves soil water retention because that biochar is very porous and it will hold water. So you end up having to water less. It improves the soil structure, reduces compaction, and increases aeration because you don't want like big chunks this big. If it's that, if it's a big chunk like that, then it isn't burned enough. You're looking for stuff like that big. You can buy biochar. You can totally buy it, but it's awful fun to make it, and kids love it because you're burning something. It's just kind of fun. Increases soil carbon, which facilitates healthier plant life, facilitates the growth of soil microbes. Why and how? Because those microbes will get into that biochar, and it's like a little house for them. You think of a clam with a little clam shell. Well, the biochar becomes the habitat, if you will, for microbes. Provides a habitat for beneficial organisms. Biochar can retain and release nutrients, which is helpful when wanting to avoid chemical fertilizers. Remember we talked about sort of that slow release of nutrients versus this one and done. It's not a flash pan. It's just like we fed our kids over time, nutrient-dense, good foods. We're doing the same to our garden. It improves the water retention and nutrient availability, leading to increased plant growth. It also helps plants withstand stress from drought, heat, or nutrient deficiencies. When we moved to Maine, 25 years ago now, 24 years ago, whatever it's been, I thought I was going to die. I didn't think I'd ever been anywhere so cold, in this country anyway. I had been in cold in China, but never here. And we came here from the country of Yemen. You know, it's 120 degrees over there, and you're wearing the black shroud thing. Over there at 90, they're cold. Well, we moved to Maine in October, and I thought, I'm not confident I'm going to make it here. Like, my staff were so sweet. They brought me hats and gloves and mittens. Oh, you're going to be okay. And, you know, we adjusted over time. But that cold that I experienced then, I don't get anymore. And it's not because I've adjusted to it, right? Things are changing in terms of our climate. There's lots of arguments as to why that is. But our summers now are hot and humid. That's what I grew up with in Virginia. I didn't have that when I moved to Maine. We didn't even have an air conditioner in our house when we moved to Maine because we didn't need it in the summer. 1 or 2 days, maybe you might need it, but that was it. Now, I can bring on the AC and it's not a hot flash, you know. We're having hotter, more humid summers. And so for our plants, in fact, there's conversation about this in the gardening world because they're having to change. Remember, I don't remember if it was last session or the session before when we talked about the zones, how they're numbered and then subcategorized as well. They're having to change some of those because the growing conditions have changed in different locations. So this concept to be able to withstand drought and heat, it's real and it's changing everywhere. So whatever we can do to help to facilitate, you know, our plants being able to be more steady and stable is a good thing. All right, any questions about anything that we've talked about so far?
So you mix this biochar into the soil?
Yeah, you just totally mix it right in. I take like a little fork, like a garden fork, and I'll just mix it right down in. Another thing that you can do, and I didn't believe it until I did it, we put in an orchard some years ago, and at the place where I got my trees, they said, now Cheryl, every year at the rain drip area, think about planting some garlic. It'll keep critters away. And then some inches inside of that rain drip, think about, just planting some kitchen scraps. I thought, what in the world? Like we've composted for years. We've got one of those things, you put it in and you turn it and you get the tea out, and we get kind of wild and crazy with it a little bit. But this was literally go dig a hole and put kitchen scraps, egg shells, banana peelings, broccoli stems, whatever, put it right in that hole and then cover it up. Your trees will love it. I'd never heard of something
Worms
so.
will eat it and chew it up?
The worms will come get it, eat it, and they pull it down towards the roots.
So Cheryl, you don't have to have those boxes in your living room after all.
Oh, right? That's right. Yeah, I didn't believe it. And so I tried it one year. I'm like, these people have to be crazy. Like, I told you about when I first went to what's that fair in September, the Common Ground Fair? I'd never seen so many Birkenstocks and dreadlocks in my whole life. And I thought, these people are crazy. Well, now I'm right there with them, like bring it on. And I think that's where I heard about this, is when I first came into contact with this particular farm. Anyway, so I tried it. I'm like, I just want to see what happens, So we did. It was in June. We dug our little hole. We put the stuff in. And of course, my daughter thought, Mom, this is gross. And then in August, at the end of August, we went back and I dug up the hole. And the only thing left was a stem. The part of the banana, the stem that's like really, really, really hard. That was the only thing that was left. There was nothing else left in that hole. It was gone. It was a darker, richer color than when we had planted it, but it was gone. It completely vanished.
They say, like for an apple tree, how many of those pots you put around the tree? Or
Yeah,
just one?
Yeah, just one. You dig a hole and you stick it in and you cover it up. And I thought, these people are crazy as bats.
So the worms will move it all
They will
around.
move it
where
all
it's in.
around.
Oh,
Isn't that
wow. I didn't.
So like how,
time of, oh, sorry.
well, I was gonna say, how much like material, like kind
So I had like a like a metal bowl, like a salad bowl full of stuff. And we dug a hole, yay. Just to pour it all in, stuff it in. Lettuce leaves, cabbage. I don't eat the outside of, if I buy a head of lettuce, I don't eat the outside leaves, or a head of cabbage, I don't eat the outside leaves. I used to feed it to the chickens, and we don't have chickens anymore. So it just all went in there, and I thought, this is hooey.
And do you harvest the garlic, or do you just let it reseed itself?
We harvest it.
You do.
So you just plant it around the bottom of the tree, the
Yeah.
leaves of the tree.
Yeah, the drip line, because every year the tree's getting bigger, so the drip line moves. So you want the garlic around it because it helps to keep the deer. We were having real issues with deer, and I did not want to go through the expense of putting fencing around the whole orchard. That gets expensive, and it's time consuming. It's a lot of hard work. Yeah, and they can jump it. You're very right. So we planted the big bulbs of garlic, and I thought, is the fruit going to taste like garlic? I was so dumb. I didn't know, but you learn as you go,
Garlic apples.
I know, garlic apples. And it doesn't, but we have not had nearly the critter problems because they don't like the garlic. Okay, so I asked Dan this morning to please go out to our garden and get us a little dirt. I wanted dirt from the garden, and then I wanted dirt from outside of the garden, and he misunderstood. So he brought dirt from the garden, and he brought dirt from the woods, which isn't quite showing you the difference between the dirt that we've been working on for a little bit versus the dirt that's there. But this is dirt from one of our beds that's about 2 years old, and I can tell you, when we first started working with this soil, it was much, much, much lighter in color, more of a gray than a black. It's not where I want it to be, but it's a whole lot better than it was, And this bed, I think he said we grew tomatoes in last year, if I remember correctly. This was our tomato bed soil versus this is more brown, but you can see even the striation. So he literally just dug down into the ground and put it in, including we got some things sticking out, pine needles sticking out.
Maybe he did that so you know the difference.
Right.
They look alike, actually.
You can see that there's some color differences here. It's darker on top than it is down below. So things are decomposing up here and going down. The moral of the story is, no matter how bad your soil might be, you can change it. You can change it. Ours was very much clay-like. I don't know what to do with clay. In fact, I talked to Dr. Hal. I'm like, Tim, what do I do with the clay? Oh, Cheryl. And so he shared with me his experience, and I asked this person and that person and the other person. You can change your soil. Now, that doesn't mean if you want to start a farm that you go find the most terrible farm with the most horrible soil known to man. I'm not suggesting that, but I am saying we can work with what we've got. If all you've got is a pot, grow a pot. If you got a little backyard, grow something in the backyard if you can. And even if your soil's not great right now, you can work with it. You can work with it. Last thing, if you guys are up for it, we're going to head out to the little grow box where we were the last time. I want to show you a little bit about how you can extend your growing season. Are you guys up for that? Just for a few minutes more? Okay, any questions about anything that we've talked about?
I do have a question as far as, again, I got pots. So I've always taken whatever's left at the end of the growing season, and I've taken it out. So should I leave it in?
So I take it out of the ground, and depending upon what it is and how well I liked it and grew it, I don't let it reseed itself. I used to do that because I didn't know any better. Now we've stopped allowing things to reseed themselves. I will take the material out of the ground, roots and all, and then I will let it rot back in. If I choose not to do that, because
What do you mean?
In the same pot or in your compost pile?
well, I was going to say, it depends on, sometimes I will choose to, for example, I have a bed, I have beds in the garden that we've talked about. I have 3 raised beds, like raised beds. In one of those beds, I have an apothecary garden. So I grow things that are helpful and that are medicinal, like mullein and things that can be used for medicinal purposes. Mullin's really great for your lungs. Well, somebody planted a little cilantro out there, which I haven't quite found a medicinal purpose for cilantro yet. It probably exists, but I haven't found it yet. What I have found is that cilantro makes babies real easy, and it completely took over my apothecary, garden, and I because I didn't pull it up, I didn't pull it out, I didn't get rid of it, right? And then the next year, it was like somebody poured gasoline on a fire, whoosh, cilantro everywhere. Same with mint. Mint can do the same thing. So depending upon what it is, I might, if it's something tender and easy and whatever, I might just let it decompose right there. Otherwise, I'm probably going to put it in my compost pile and turn it. So I will let beans, like bean bushes, I'll let those stay right in the garden. Because I'll just turn those over. Because I've harvested the beans, right? Because the beans are the seed. So it's not going to grow a new bean bush next year. But by leaving that bean plant in there, it's getting some nice nitrogen into my dirt and that sort of thing. And it's a tender thing, so it's going to decompose nicely, versus something that can be a little bit more woody, a little bit harder, will take a longer time to decompose. Anything that's going to take a while goes in the compost pile. But anything that's tender, that's just going to wilt away, I'll just let it wilt away right there. I would just leave the dirt, but I pull it out by the roots. Yeah, I don't want the root to stay in. Yeah. So I've also been known to relieve it of its roots, so and leave the green and discard the roots. So it kind of depends on how big the pot is and what you're growing.
Can you give a list of some of the things that would encourage nitrogen? What plants will give nitrogen versus phosphorus?
Yeah, so beans are really good at that. That's my one of choice because I like to eat them and they're so good for me. So that's actually what I use for that. And so that's one of the things that our property was a little bit deficient in, our garden was a little bit deficient in. And so we just planted a ton of beans, and it took off nicely. And 2 years later, because I should test my soil every year and I don't, 2 years later when we tested the soil again, the nitrogen was great. It was totally where it needed to be, and the only thing that we did was plant beans. And what kind of beans? I have used pole beans, I have used bush beans. I really like, guys, there's a green bean, it's called a jade. Jade. It's hard to get because as soon as they become available, everyone's buying them up. They produce like wildfire. They are so tender and sweet and awesome. It's a green bean. It's not thick or thin. It's like a medium size, long bean. It's called a jade, and it's a green bean. So if you go to Johnny's or Fedco and just put in their search engine Jade. I grew a tremendous amount of those, and I think they are the ones that added a really great amount of nitrogen to my soil. We've also grown like dried beans, so cattle beans. So if you do beans, they're fabulous, but know what you planted. So when you are planting in your garden, unless you know what a plant looks like by looking at it, you need to mark your garden. I use like little popsicle sticks and I'll write on it. Don't use the package because it's going to rain and all the packaging is going to go to squat, right? I use little popsicle sticks, and my father-in-law had a burner. So later, when I got a little bit more fancy, I have like little stakes with plaques on it, tomatoes and whatever, for those staple crops. But for those ones that I don't know, I use little popsicle sticks, and I'll just put it right into the ground, because my sweet little mama last summer went out, and she is such a blessing to me. I just love her. And she went out and noticed that our green beans, were really coming on hard, and I was away. And so she went out and she harvested our green beans, and they were a little funny looking to her, but I grow funny things anyway, so she didn't think twice about it. She harvested all of our dried beans, all of them. They weren't green beans at all, but they kind of look like that as they're growing. Okay, so make sure you label in your garden what you're doing so that you remember, because you can forget, because things can fool you. It's coming on and it looks like a green bean. Well, good, I'm going to grab that and eat it. Oh man, that's not a green bean, that's my dried beans, which means I just lost a whole crop full of dried beans. We ate them. I didn't necessarily enjoy them, but I'm not going to waste the nutrition. So make sure you know what you're doing in your garden, and you won't. You'll forget if you're anything like me. So just stick something in there to remind you, kind of what you got going on. Any other questions?
The cranberry bean, is that a dry bean or a cook the whole pod?
Yeah, that's a dried bean. So when I grow dried beans, I let them dry in the field. I don't harvest them at all until they are completely dried. And what I mean by dried, like the pod is friable. Like if I were to do this, it would just disintegrate. Let them dry in the field, and then you can bring them in and store them. They're so easy and so nutritious. All of your dried beans, and they're easy to store. I just put them in a jar, and off to the races we go.
So the pods will be brown, obviously.
So yeah, the pods will be brown. So for your dried beans, the pod is usually a little bit wider, not always, but usually it's a little bit wider, a little bit thicker, because that bean is growing inside there. And some of them can be great big long, but most of them are yay, size. And if you just let them dry in the field, you're not having to tear your thumbs apart trying to get that bean out of the pod. It becomes, crumbly.
Completely dry on the outside, that means the bean inside is dry then?
It should be.
Okay. You don't have to pick it out of the pod and then let it dry.
You shouldn't have to. There have been times when I have pulled things because there was like a big storm coming. We tend to get storms here like the end of September into October, and for my dried beans, they're still out. Some of them, not all of them, are still out in